In the summer of 2007, a red Ford F-150 Lariat rolled off the assembly line in Norfolk, Virginia. It was the last truck that plant would ever build. The workers who guided it down the line knew it. Some of them had spent their entire adult lives inside that building. Their fathers had worked there. In a few cases, their grandfathers too. And the strange part, the part that still doesn't sit right with a lot of people, is that there was nothing wrong with the plant. Norfolk Assembly wasn't failing. It wasn't building bad trucks. By almost every measure Ford had, it was one of the best plants in the entire company. Top quality ratings, high productivity, a workforce that took genuine pride in what they built. And yet Ford shut it down anyway. So why would a company close one of its best factories? Why walk away from 82 years of history, from a place that had produced nearly 8 million vehicles, from a workforce that had done everything right? The answer to that question tells you something uncomfortable about how American industry actually works. And it has almost nothing to do with the people who showed up every morning and built those trucks. Norfolk Assembly opened on April 20th, 1925, on the banks of the Elizabeth River, just outside downtown Norfolk. The original purpose was simple: build Model Ts for the mid-Atlantic market. Ford was expanding fast in the 20s, and Norfolk gave them a port city with rail access and a deep labour pool. The plant was modelled loosely after Ford's River Rouge complex in Michigan, which tells you how seriously the company took the site. Over time, Norfolk grew into something more than just an assembly line. It had its own powerhouse, its own water treatment facility, a barber shop, a restaurant, a fitness centre. At one point there was even a small television studio on the grounds. For decades, the plant built a rotating cast of Ford vehicles, sedans, wagons, various car lines that came and went as the market shifted. Full-size models like the Galaxy and the LTD rolled out of Norfolk through the 60s and into the 70s. But by the mid-70s, car production ended there, and the plant shifted over to trucks. That shift turned out to be the defining chapter of Norfolk's life, because the truck it would eventually build, the Ford F-150, wasn't just any vehicle. It was America's best-selling vehicle, period. Not best-selling truck, best-selling vehicle, year after year after year. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know these stories don't end the way you want them to. The factories that built this country have a way of disappearing even when they're still doing their job. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing. We cover the real history of American working life, the parts that don't always make it into the textbooks. And if you or someone in your family ever worked in an auto plant, a steel mill, any kind of factory, a jacket shop, drop a comment and tell us where. You'd be surprised how many people in this audience share that experience. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Norfolk Assembly had settled into a rhythm. The plant was building F-150s, and it was building them well. Internal quality metrics consistently placed Norfolk near the top of Ford's entire manufacturing network. The trucks coming out of that facility were getting favourable reviews from critics and customers alike. Production was efficient. The workforce, roughly 2,400 people at its peak, knew what they were doing. Ford noticed. In 2001, the Commonwealth of Virginia announced that Ford would invest approximately $375 million to expand the Norfolk facility. The centerpiece was a new 350,000 square foot body shop. Virginia sweetened the deal with state incentive grants totaling $3.5 million, a $3 million Virginia Investment Partnership Grant, and a $500,000 Governor's Opportunity Fund grant. The expansion was expected to add up to 200 new jobs on top of the existing workforce. Political leaders treated the investment as a signal of long-term commitment. Norfolk Assembly wasn't just surviving, it was growing. It was a symbol of industrial stability in a region that needed one. That investment would be fully spent within 3 years. Within 5, the plant would be dead. To understand why Norfolk closed, you have to understand what was happening inside Ford as a company. Not in Norfolk, but in Dearborn. By the mid-2000s, Ford was bleeding. Market share was falling. Losses were mounting. The company had too many plants building too many vehicles that not enough people were buying. The entire North American operation was running at a level of overcapacity that simply could not continue. In January 2006, Ford unveiled what it called the Way Forward Plan. The name was corporate language, but the reality was blunt. Ford intended to close at least 14 plants, a number that would later expand to 16. 25,000 to 30,000 hourly jobs would be eliminated. North American factory capacity would be cut by roughly 26% compared to 2005 levels. The company aimed to slash $5 to $6 billion in operating and material costs. The stated goal was to stop building vehicles just to keep factories running. Ford wanted to align production with what people were actually buying, not with what the plants were capable of producing. It was a distinction that sounded reasonable in a boardroom. On a factory floor, it sounded like a death sentence. Norfolk Assembly was on the list. So were plants in St. Louis, Atlanta, Wixom, and the Twin Cities. Company leadership described the closures as painful but necessary to move the business forward. And here is where the story gets difficult, because the reasons Norfolk was chosen had almost nothing to do with Norfolk. One of the primary factors working against Norfolk was something no amount of hard work or quality improvement could fix: its location on a map. Ford's supplier base was concentrated in the upper Midwest, clustered in and around Michigan and neighboring states. Norfolk sat on the coast of Virginia, hundreds of miles from the parts network that fed the assembly line. Every bolt, every wire harness, every dashboard component had to travel farther to reach Norfolk than it would to reach a plant in Ohio or Missouri or Michigan. That distance cost money. But it also created a more subtle problem. It made just-in-time logistics harder. The entire modern auto industry runs on a system where parts arrive at the plant almost exactly when they're needed, not days or weeks early. Traffic congestion in the Hampton Roads region complicated that system further. Synchronizing deliveries in Norfolk was simply more difficult than doing it closer to the supply chain's center of gravity. When Ford started looking at which plants to keep and which to cut, geography became a filter. Plants that were outliers, physically distant from the supplier network, were more vulnerable, regardless of what they were producing or how well they were producing it. The second factor was flexibility, or more precisely, the lack of it. By the early 2000s, Norfolk was essentially a single-product plant. It built the F-150. That was it. It didn't build the Super Duty, the F-250 and above. It didn't build the Expedition SUV. It had once assembled passenger cars, but that era was long over. Other Ford plants were being repositioned for what the industry calls flexible manufacturing, the ability to build multiple models or platform variants on the same line. Kansas City, for example, could produce both the Escape SUV and the F-150. That kind of flexibility made a plant far more valuable in a restructuring because it could adapt to shifting demand without requiring a complete retooling. Making Norfolk fully flexible would have required massive additional capital investment, on top of the $375 million that had just been spent. Ford was trying to cut billions in costs. Pouring more money into a geographically isolated single-model plant didn't fit the math. We're about halfway through, and if you're still here, you're one of the people who actually cares about these stories, the ones about real places and real work that shape this country. If you're finding value in this, a like goes a long way in helping more people find the channel. There's more to this story, including what happened to the workers and what Norfolk's closure tells us about how the American auto industry really makes decisions. There was a third pressure bearing down on Norfolk, and it was bigger than any single plant. The early to mid-2000s saw growing signs of overcapacity in North American truck production. Consumer preferences were beginning to shift, fuel prices were climbing, competition from foreign automakers, particularly Japanese manufacturers, was intensifying. Ford had seen this cycle before at Norfolk. In the early 1980s, when truck sales fell, the plant lost its second shift and laid off workers. The plant's fortunes had always been tied to the cyclical nature of truck demand, and by 2006, the cycle was turning again. Ford's leadership concluded that the company needed to reduce truck capacity to match softer and more volatile demand. The priority was profitability, not volume. Building trucks just to fill a factory was exactly the kind of thinking the Way Forward plan was designed to eliminate. When Ford announced in April 2006 that Norfolk would close, it made a calculation that was coldly logical. The company's other F-150 plants, located closer to the supplier base and designed for higher volume, could collectively produce over 900,000 F-150 LS per year by adding shifts and reconfiguring equipment. Norfolk's output could be absorbed without building a single new facility. In other words, the truck could survive without the plant. The F-150 wasn't going anywhere. It was still America's best-selling vehicle. But the specific building where some of those trucks were assembled had become, in Ford's analysis, redundant. The $375 million spent on the expansion just a few years earlier, that was a sunk cost. In the language of corporate finance, money already spent cannot justify future spending. The upgrades had improved productivity and quality, but they couldn't change geography. They couldn't make Norfolk closer to Michigan. They couldn't make the plant flexible enough to build 3 or 4 different models. And they couldn't stop Ford from losing billions. Ford publicly announced the closure in April 2006, with an original target of 2008. But as the company deepened its cuts later, that year, the timeline was pulled forward. Norfolk would lose a shift in January 2007. Full shutdown would follow by mid-year. On June 28, 2007, the last F-150, that red Lariat, came down the line. 82 years of continuous vehicle production ended that day. Nearly 8 million vehicles had been built inside those walls, across generations of workers and decades of American life. By the time the doors closed, employment had already fallen to about 1,250 hourly and salaried workers, down from the 2,400 peak. Attrition, buyouts, and early retirement packages had thinned the ranks in the months leading up to the end. Ford offered multiple exit packages, lump sums, educational assistance, transfers to other plants like Dearborn Truck. Many workers used the educational benefits to retrain. Some started small businesses. But the consensus among those who lived through it was straightforward. Wages like that would be hard to find anywhere else in Hampton Roads. Norfolk's story was not unique. Ford's Twin Cities assembly plant in St. Paul, Minnesota, closed around the same time under nearly identical circumstances. That plant was also one of Ford's most productive facilities. It also suffered from an aging site layout, single model dependence, in its case the Ranger, and a location that didn't align with Ford's future network. The pattern across Ford's mid-2000s restructuring was consistent. The company was not simply closing its worst plants. It was redesigning its entire manufacturing footprint around a new set of priorities: model flexibility, supplier proximity, and network efficiency. Plants that fell on the wrong side of that strategic realignment were closed regardless of their individual performance. Workers at Norfolk understood this clearly. Union representatives said repeatedly that the closure was about the dollar, not about performance. The plant met or exceeded Ford's standards. It just didn't fit the map Ford was drawing for its future. Norfolk Assembly closed after building 7.9 million vehicles because Ford decided that within its overall North American network, the plant's location, its single model dependence, and the capital it would take to modernize it further made it less strategic than alternatives. Quality didn't save it. Productivity didn't save it. $375 million in recent investment didn't save it. 82 years of history didn't save it. The closure was not a verdict on the people who worked there. It was a verdict on a map, a spreadsheet, and a set of assumptions about where the auto industry was heading. And that is perhaps the most unsettling part of this story. Not that a plant closed, plants close. Not that jobs were lost, jobs are always being lost somewhere. But that a community can do everything right, a workforce can build a world-class product, a state can invest millions in incentives, and none of it matters when the decision is being made in a boardroom 1,000 miles away by people solving a different equation entirely. Norfolk Assembly didn't fail. It was optimized out of existence. That's the story of Norfolk Assembly. 82 years, nearly 8 million vehicles, and a closure that had nothing to do with the people who built them. If this is the kind of history you think more people should hear about, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got more stories from the places and the people that built this country, and they deserve to be remembered. We'll see you in the next one.